Hi.
You ready?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Did that ring true to you?
Yes, it did.
Good. So we're on the right track at least.
Yep.
Let's see. Okay. This is, as I mentioned, one of the great icons of 20th century photography. I think if people know one picture that your father made, it's probably this one. This happens to be you, Barbara.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I would be remiss if I didn't start the conversation by asking you to tell us about how and when it was made. Will you tell us that story?
It's interesting. It is me. There's no doubt about that. But it's not me.
Yeah.
It's a child.
Mm-hmm.
Dad clothed and fed and housed us by being a commercial photographer. He got the photographic concession at Fort Ord military base. He photographed soldiers. He had a photo finishing studio. And when this was taken, I was about 5 or 6. We were on a road trip. He was taking picture postcards for the Greyhound Bus Company. That was the reason for the... This one day, we were in Northern California driving, and a lot of you have the color hair that I do, so you might remember that back in the early 50s, you didn't stop and eat at a restaurant. You packed a picnic lunch and you had pullouts along the road where you would stop and have lunch. And we were getting very hungry. We were driving along. We couldn't find a pullout. Mother had packed a wonderful lunch and we wanted to eat it. And we kept looking and we finally saw this very dusty pullout. There was a trash can overflowing with litter, but it had a picnic table, so we stopped and we had our lunch, and Dad noticed that just beyond the clearing was a barbed wire fence that had a gap in it. And so, being curious, he stepped through, walked about 100 yards, and found this setting. And he came back and he said, "Come." And he was so moved by what looked like this ancient primordial forest that had been untouched for eons. And by this time, I was used to his asking me to take off my clothes, and what it meant to me was getting close to nature. It was not an unusual thing. It felt fine. What didn't feel fine in the beginning is that underneath all that lovely oxalis is dry redwood needles. They're very prickly. And so Mom went back to the car and she got a blanket and tucked it underneath me. And I remember still how it felt to be there, smelling the damp, rich scents of the earth and feeling the light on my body. And then, as I quieted, because it takes him a long time to get ready, I suddenly felt the thrum of that forest coming through my body. It was magical. And I think you can, see that I was relaxed and at peace. It was a beautiful experience, and it helped me be the person I am today. But there's one other short story about it. It was chosen by Edward Steichen to be part of the Family of Man show. And Edward wrote a letter to Dad saying that he felt that it was one of the very small group of great photographs. He really was moved by this. But it turned out to be one of the most controversial. As the Family of Man show traveled all over the world, people would, at that time, send telegrams to MoMA. Yeah. Is she dead? Mm-hmm. Is she a statue? Mm-hmm. Has she been molested? Was she abandoned? And Dad would respond, well, for one, I wouldn't be photographing if any of those things happened. But there was nothing sinister about it. He felt that it was an image of great peacefulness and connection, but also, as you said, a study in contrasts, many, many different contrasts that help us understand the nature of life and death. So in 1955, I think, is when the show came out. And our local newspaper put this picture on the front page. Local photographer makes it big. So what did I do? I clipped it out and I took it to show and tell. And I two things. For the first time in my life, I felt naked. Even though I had, been unclothed many, many times in photographs. And the second, I realized how different my family was from everybody else. It was kind of a hard moment for me, but I went home and my parents were so loving, and they just said, "Remember how you felt that day." And they enveloped me in their love, and I remembered. And it's one of my favorite pictures, too. Yeah.
That's great. Lynn, this is you.
Yes.
Tell us what your experience was like to model for your father, and did you understand what was going on when you made these pictures? I mean, as you got older, I'm sure you did, but at the time, what was that experience like? And
well, there's a title of one of Dad's books, Photography, A Way of Life, and that's what it was like for me. Uh-huh. He started photographing me almost as soon as I was born. Mm-hmm. So it was natural, normal, and an expectation that, mm-hmm. Whether it's a family photograph or a photograph like this, many times when he photographed me, it was after a picnic. We would go down to Big Sur or Point Lobos. There's a story of the family that we went down there one day, had a picnic, and after we finished, I started ripping my clothes off, ready to be photographed. And they asked me, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Are you going to photograph me?" And I said, "No, not today." And I guess I burst into tears. So, and Dad would engage my imagination. He photographed me a lot in cold streams or near cold streams. Uh-huh. So I was very involved in fairies and mermaids, and he would say, "Imagine you're a mermaid." And I always carried a doll with me. So in this particular instance,
Right.
he used both of us,
Right.
unclothed. And I was playing, really.
Mm-hmm. And it has almost a threatening feel to it. I mean, you feel that tension as though the doll could drop into the stream and be carried away, or that you could because of the angle on these enormous logs. Was it not really that way?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. And what has become of the doll?
She is currently at home. She apologizes for not being here, but she was exhausted after going through a move to a new home and surviving the fires in Northern California. So
She's resting,
she's resting.
but you still have her.
I still have her. She's on the bookcase in our bedroom, and I see her every morning and every time I go into the room.
Clothed or unclothed?
Clothed.
She is clothed. Here you are at the beach. Two of these pictures are you in very candid images. And then you have a picture down below that is an artwork. I mean, these are more works of a family historian or someone who would document you. Were you aware of the difference between these two pictures when you were posing for them?
No.
No.
I was.
You were.
But there's 8 years difference between us.
Right.
So when I was working with Dad, I was quite a bit older. You were younger.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I think I was about 2 or 3
Yeah.
here. Yeah, well, in both pictures.
Is this the same place, by the way?
Yes.
It was taken at the same time,
The same day. Same
Yeah.
day.
And you can see her dress.
Yes.
It's a birthday party.
Uh-huh.
And we were celebrating at Point Lobos, and so we were playing,
Mm-hmm.
but then he took
And you know,
that
like
picture.
any child that plays with the ocean, you go
Right.
forward and try not to get caught by
Right.
the waves.
Right.
Well, that's what I was doing.
I love that one.
And that's the woman who became the photographer at age 61. That's Mama. She started out as a dancer. She loved to dance. She was a wonderful dancer, and she was very athletic. And she's showing off. She's probably the only one in the family who could do that.
Well,
Yes, well.
So what did it mean to you, Barbara, when, I mean, this one is Lynne, not you, but
Right.
when you would transition from a picture like that to that, what did that mean to you at the time?
Actually, I was much more comfortable
In that mode?
in that
In the
mode.
art mode?
than I was.
Right.
I think a lot of us are self-conscious about
Right.
ourselves as
Well,
particular human beings.
Here you are you. And
Yes.
here you're standing in for humanity.
Right.
Right.
So I was much more comfortable doing that.
Uh-huh.
I was, don't take my photograph.
Right.
But I never felt that way when I was working with them.
Interesting.
And it felt as though we were working together. But I had that
age.
Yeah, and you said, it was just a way of life. It was what our family was and did.
what happened?
Right. Right.
And I remember Dad engaging me at a very early age,
Mm-hmm.
talking about
Mm-hmm.
ideas. And
Let's talk about that here.
Okay.
Here he is working in various capacities. Tell us about that experience of being with him when he talked about his work, when he was printing, when he was out in the field.
you want to go first?
Well, for me, it was a teaching opportunity. When he was thinking about space and time, reality and existence, he had, 3 stones or a fossil, and he would pick it up and ask me, does this have more space or time? Like the fossil would have more time because of the age.
Right.
So he would engage me in more of a teaching situation.
Right. So the ideas that were flowing through the work were the ideas that he was imparting to you in conversation. Yeah. And
He was obsessive about that. He would talk to everybody and anybody.
Right.
We had a young woman come to the house, and often people would show up. Just they had seen a photograph by him, and they were eager to meet him. They would knock on the door. Well, in this particular case, it was a young woman selling books and Bibles. And so Dad answered the door, and she started. And so he began engaging her with what he was really interested in. And she came in, and they got very involved in talking, and by the end she said, "I would love to work with you." She never sold another book and Bible, and she became a model.
Wow.
And was a partner. He invited the people that he worked with to be partners. That, you weren't a subject, but you were working together.
a collaborator.
And that was true for us as well. And many of his models who weren't in the family became family friends. And they all were engaged in that pursuit of mystery. They caught what he was after, and it was important to them as well. Now, in the middle picture, he's spotting. He could be very quiet and focused and contemplative.
The work feels that way.
Yes, it does.
As though there's a quiet person behind it.
I think he had such a deep capacity for empathy. And he listened. He listened to what he was photographing and opening himself up to it. And so I think you get that.
Yes.
That's conveyed in his imagery. One of the things that we loved to do, that the dark room was just a tiny little thing,
Beneath the studio.
beneath the studio,
And
8
behind
by 10 maybe.
Yeah, and behind the garage.
One-car garage. There's just a little hole in the wall. But when he was there, he had music piped in, and he would sing. And we would go in the studio and listen.
Well, my job at one point was to actually put on the opera records and the classical music records for him, so he could listen to it.
And then sing along. So, he never lost that love of music, and it was thrilling for us to hear him sing. We have in the audience someone, Chris Johnson, who I think is very familiar with how intense Dad could be in working through, thinking about the ideas that excited him. He was a person of great curiosity, and sometimes his head would shake with the intensity of the ideas that he was grappling with. And I think his legacy is the importance and significance of his legacy is as much about his ideas and what he was pursuing as the artifacts that document that exploration.
It was the journey that mattered to
Yes.
him. Yeah.
Yes.
And you can't separate the
Yeah.
philosophy from his photographs.
Right.
I mean, the photographs document his evolution
Right.
and his thoughts.
Let's go ahead real quick to the color work. And you were present, is that right, when he was making some of these?
We both were.
You both were? Okay.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the mad scientist.
Well, at the beginning, he had a small house built in the back patio with wheels, thinking that, with a very large window, thinking that he could move the house to capture the light.
He would use natural light, to make these.
Ah,
Yes.
okay.
Well, it didn't work.
Yeah.
Well, Monterey is foggy,
Yeah.
so there weren't even many sunny days.
So it became my playhouse.
Right.
And he moved into the studio.
And what was it like this, he made this, right? I mean, this is a diagram that,
It's a very crude diagram, yes. He used a macro lens on a dual rail extension so he could get very, very close to the upper layer. And as you said, he built a very crude handmade apparatus, redwood block, notched, and then he would put clear panes of glass, and then he would collect items like colored cellophane and shard stained glass and patterned glass, and he got a whole box of chunks of fine optical glass, which I guess you guys know here at the University of Arizona, where lenses are made, beautiful, huge lenses. Well, there was a discarded lens from a Palomar observatory, and he got these beautiful chunks of this fine optical glass, and he had a special hammer, and he would chip off fragments of it, and they would then refract and reflect light in very interesting ways. So we would put those on the top layer, and then he would put all of these other items that reflected and refracted light. Could be drops of water, honey.
Abalone shells. He used prisms as well.
Right, and then he used prisms and different light sources, and then he literally composed his images. So by moving the light, moving these various pieces, he composed
Constructed
through the ground glass. So these pictures were not random or happenstance. They were
controlled.
He
in a
knew
way.
what he was doing. He composed with
Yeah.
light, like you
Right.
quoted him.
Right.
And he would invite us to come. He would sit on a high stool, and he would put the focusing cloth over our heads, and we would enter this realm of. A lot of the images are like images from the Hubble telescope, but we didn't know what the universe looked like when he was making these. These literally were made 1959 to 1965, way before Photoshop, way before the kinds of things that we can do now,
Right.
way before the Hubble telescope.
Right.
And the other thing that I love about these is that it kind of connects the macrocosm and the microcosm.
Yeah.
So it's like looking very deeply into the microscopic world, but also
Right.
the
Cosmos.
Right.
Yes, the cosmos, the very vast.
So with that in mind, let's go back to that picture. and why don't we hear that story, and then we'll turn it over to any questions that may be in the audience. I love this one.
Yeah.
Will you tell?
When this was made, Dad was working with an 8x10 camera, and that's a heavy booger. I mean, it's really it's a big hulking camera with a heavy tripod, and you carry a great big heavy case with your film holders. And he was at Point Lobos, and he was walking along the shore, and all of a sudden he came onto a galaxy in a tide pool. And he set up his camera, which was not a fast thing to do. And he liked to bracket his exposures. Can you explain what that means?
No, not really.
Can you explain what that means? So anyway, you
Take a
you
picture
take it
before and you take it.
right, and then you on either side to hopefully get a good exposure.
That works.
And so he took one exposure, a gust of wind
He
came up,
turned around to get another film holder.
and a gust of wind came up. It was gone.
But what is this?
What do you think it is?
Well, I know. I'm asking because they don't know.
They're microcosm. They're
Microorganisms.
yes,
Yeah.
microorganisms.
Yeah.
Yep. That
Yeah, just
created
on the
this
kind of
pattern.
sort of
It's not
scum.
ice. They were kind of pale green and kind of glowy and
Right.
but
Not nearly as pleasant as this picture.
well, no, actually beautiful.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I mean, that's what he said.
Right.
He also said, I was just damn lucky that day.
Right.
Because he
Right.
got an exposure that he could work with.
Right.
It wasn't a good negative, but he
He
was
worked with
able.
it.
He worked with it, and a lot of his image making was done in the darkroom. He said most of the time he was so involved in experiencing what he was taking that technique took second place.
Right.
And so his negatives were often,
Not in the darkroom.
but not in
Technique
the
saved
darkroom.
him in
He
the
was a
darkroom.
master.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But
But he had to do it in the darkroom rather than,
Right.
create this perfect negative.
Negative. Yeah.
But he also said that that experience of taking it, finding it, and then having it disappear is how he experienced the universe. That it's constantly being created and recreated, moment by moment. And so for him, his personal experience for that was that experience of kind of the essence of an ever-changing universe.
Right.